Well, welcome back to the Pastor Pod. We are on episode 50 of the podcast. This is amazing. I mean, this is probably one of the greatest moments of my life as a podcaster. Jay, we're here 50 in, and we have a great friend here with us today to celebrate this momentous occasion.
Right. I just want to give thanks to my mom, to my director,
and Trevor Lawrence from the Jaguars.
Yeah, those who have played such a great impact role in making this happen. I just thank you all for that. For our voiceover, Cassidy Robinson, thank you.
Yes.
For those who made the graphics, thank you. We would be here to accept this award. Wait a minute, there's no award. Yes, episode 50. It's really exciting. I had my doubts, Josh. I had my doubts, but you being the strong leader that you are led us to this place. So such a good time. So Bob Bumgarner, thank you again for being with us. This is great because you know us probably. I think you know us better than most people, and kind of saw this.
I still love you.
Today we're talking about grace and mercy.
You kind of saw this in our infancy stage. One of our first guests.
Yeah, I was thinking I was up there in the beginning. Yeah.
I can't remember. Was he the first guest?
I think he was.
I think you were the first guest because you were the first one. We're like, we need a guinea pig, somebody who can give us forgiveness.
He's the only one that responded to my emails. Yeah, he's the only one that said, "Yeah, I guess I'll do that."
So, Bob, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm
episode 50. This is a big deal. And Josh, I got to say, I'm pretty disappointed no one took us up on our pumpkin offer last week.
Well, I don't know if they thought we were. Do you think the listeners thought we were serious? Because we laughed a lot about pumpkin spice and pumpkin pie, and you're going to send them something pumpkin-y,
right?
But nobody responded. No one emailed. No one tweeted at us. Facebook messaged us. Whatever.
So because it's episode 50, let's make that offer for real. We're serious. You could ask for a pumpkin pie, and I'll figure out how to get you a pumpkin pie. So. We'll say this. We'll do a drawing. All right. And so today you're going to listen to this on Friday. So you have all day Friday to tweet at us, email us, whatever it is, put all those names in a hat, and I'll draw a name, and I will send a pumpkin item of your choice. It can be everything from a pumpkin, a real pumpkin, to a pumpkin pie or pumpkin donuts or whatever you want to choose. They have pumpkin everything. So
this is so exciting.
So it's going to happen. I can't wait for someone to take me up on it. And
I can't wait.
Okay. The only rule I have is it can't be related to you or I, Josh. So tell your wife.
If I listen on Friday, I can.
Cassie's like, we're going to Starbucks.
She can't participate. So anyhow, all right. That being said, listen, let's get right into content because I know people are more excited about Bob and what some knowledge he's gonna drop on us today than they are about the pumpkin. But we're serious about that. So hit us up sometime today, Friday.
And if you want candy corn, listen, for all the candy corn people out there, I will send you some candy corn too.
Yuck.
And if you don't like candy corn, that's between you and the Lord.
Josh, you just sounded like Delilah.
That's this is
listen, I was in Cracker Barrel the other day. By the way, Cracker Barrel's changed.
Oh my god,
they're like offering me all kinds of interesting things on the menu. Like, I just want to go back to the good old days where they just give you greasy food. But anyway, there was candy corn everywhere, and I just felt all warm and fuzzy for me personally. So that's all I have to say about that.
Okay, well, that's a good segue to our topic today: emotional leadership. And right now I need to deal with my emotions because you're talking about candy corn. No, Bob, for real, I thank you for really leaning in on this topic specifically because emotional leadership is important. But I want to know from you, why do you believe this is such an important topic that leaders should be discussing and having conversations about?
Well, the research is in. If you ask people who they want to follow, they describe emotionally mature leaders. So the reason we need emotional intelligence as leaders is because emotionally mature leaders are the kind of people that people want to follow. I mean, Daniel Goleman years ago talked about emotional intelligence. It's really emotionally mature. That's the Harvard way of talking about emotional maturity. And at the end of the day, the reality is you may get your job because of your resume or your IQ or your connections, but your promotability, your effectiveness has almost nothing to do with your IQ. It's how well you play with others. And so emotional maturity is really a measurement of how well you play with each other.
So that back in the day when you played in the sandbox, it really did matter how well you played with other people.
Okay, it's funny that you would say the word sandbox, because in 2011, Richard Davis from the Harvard Business College wrote an article for the Harvard Business Review called "We Need More Mature Leadership," or More Mature Leaders. And that article is about children in a sandbox. And so sandbox leadership really is a great metaphor about what people don't want. They don't want the kind of, they want adults who lead, not a sandbox that people are trying to establish dominance in the workplace.
So I'm emotionally intelligent just because I came up with the sandbox. I that was unscripted. I didn't even know you were talking about a skeleton.
I know what's funny about that. We have no show notes, so you couldn't have read ahead. So, oh my gosh.
This is a special moment, Jay. I just want to pause here.
It's because it's episode 50.
Well, and
That's
let me build on this. One of the reasons that emotional maturity is so important in leaders is because immature leaders make every problem bigger. So in other words, you have a problem and you need to address it. But if somebody is emotionally immature and they won't address it, or they address it with a hand grenade, then this one problem that you could have solved now is all over the place. So emotionally mature leaders actually make problems smaller because they create a culture where people can actually talk to each other to solve the problem.
That's good. That's really good.
Yeah. So let's just take it with, let's take a look at pastors, right? I feel like I struggle in this area. You know me well, Jay, you know me well. There's times I've done well at this. There's times I've failed miserably on being emotionally healthy. So why do you think pastors struggle? Why do leaders struggle with emotional health?
Well, a couple of things. I don't think we've defined what emotional maturity looks like. And so we don't know what the goal is. We don't know when we're doing well. I would venture a definition that I have gleaned from a book called Rare Leadership. It's one of the books that I have been diving deep in this subject on. But emotional maturity is enduring hardship well. Can you, under stress, continue to act like your true self? And by true self, I don't mean in a secular sense. I mean your best self, the redeemed Jesus self. Or do you get triggered? One of the reasons that pastors, and by the way, I understand why you're saying that, because this is a pastor pod, but this is really CEOs. I mean, we're in a crisis in America with leadership. And I mean, look on SBC Twitter, look on, the political scenario. I believe the reason we don't have better candidates is because nobody wants to step into the weirdness of what leadership requires right now. But one of the things that an emotional leader does is, even when it's stressful, they're self-aware of what triggers them. And Josh, what triggers you may not trigger me. You and I have gone through Strength Finders, and we both have belief as one of our top things. And so people who have that strength, we are triggered by some things that other people wouldn't be triggered by. And so part of emotional intelligence is recognizing when I've been triggered and learning how to create space for me to get my emotions back under control so that I can still think with my highest level thinking brain, which we'll talk about in just a few minutes.
That's good. Did I lose you, Bob? You still there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
I'm just making sure. Yeah. So again, if I understand, you define emotional maturity as enduring hardship well.
Right. And
you've probably seen that happen in many scenarios where that's happened well, but you've also seen where it didn't happen well.
Right.
Right. And so let's talk a little bit about what happens. Let's lean into that a little bit more of when it doesn't happen well, like when people don't handle themselves well. What does that look like? Because again, I think some listeners might be listening and go, okay, I get it. You got to handle yourself well under hardship, but hypothetically, what does that look like? Or, don't use names, don't throw anybody on the carpet, but what does that look like when it doesn't go well And it's a sign that there's not a mature, maturity there.
So you're on somebody's staff, or you're the senior pastor, and a staff member says, hey, I want us to do a different program. Or hey, can we try something different? That seems rather innocuous, right? I mean, but if you are somebody who absolutely believes you would die on the hill for the program that this person's just talked about, what's happened is even though the person's not really challenging your authority, that's what it can feel like. And so you all of a sudden, I mean, you know what it feels like to be triggered. You know, when you're angry, you know that feeling in your chest, how your face gets hot. And there are several triggering emotions, like there's fear, anger, shame. Like, so for instance, if I say to you, Josh, hey, thank you for being a great campus pastor, but man, we need to see, it needed to be, this other result needed to happen. If I don't handle that well, then Josh is going to feel shame. And that shame can actually trigger Josh, because now because what happens when we get triggered is we don't think with our best, highest level brain. We go into what's called enemy mode. And now when he looks at me, because he's been triggered and he hasn't gotten control of his emotions again, then he sees me as the enemy. And now it's a fight. Now he wants to win, and show that he's not somebody who should have experienced shame.
Wow, that's good. Okay.
And,
yeah, I knew you.
And so you see how that can happen in parenting, in our marriages. I mean, you felt it when you're like, you've worked. I mean, this would never happen in either of your marriages, but when you think you've done something awesome as a husband, and your wife doesn't see it that same way, all of a sudden, all the sacrifices you made to make that thing happen, like, you're angry about that. So all of a sudden, you're probably not going to say things lovingly to her. I mean, if you've been triggered and haven't gotten your emotions back in control. So now this little problem, when you get back angry at that other person, wife, kid, boss, now is way bigger than it was when it was just a sentence.
Yeah. So this goes well beyond just pastors. This is really a personality, a people, in our nature of being mature emotionally. It goes into all levels of things. And so I think that's super helpful to acknowledge right up front, because I truly believe many of us want to do the best we can. We really do have that desire to change, lead out and be change makers. And we live in a culture that wants to see change, wants to do things. How do you see this idea of a leader being emotionally mature? How do you see it really helping them to lean in to maximize their influence or their leadership in whatever capacity it may be? The stay-at-home mom, the working mom, the dad, the pastor, any of those things. How do you see an emotionally mature person, really leaning into this, going, hey, this can be used to maximize my influence?
So I think you have to realize you're vulnerable to being emotionally immature. This is not an age thing. I'm 59. I mean, you don't have enough time for me to go back over the last 6 months of what times that I have had. I made a phone call today. I'm not making this up. I made a phone call today to somebody who, when they asked me a question 2 weeks ago, I responded in a way that was emotionally unintelligent. And the Holy Spirit has not let me get over it. And I called that person today and apologized. And here's the thing. I didn't yell. But I said some things that I didn't say them to fix the problem. I said them so that person would know how I felt. Does that make sense? It was a little bit of it was kind of punishing him for something that what really he didn't need punished for. And so part of it is to realize that that your spirituality never outgrows this. And so you're always going to be vulnerable. You're vulnerable when you're tired. You're vulnerable when you haven't eaten well. You're vulnerable when you haven't consumed scripture and taken care of your soul. If you're not Sabbathing, you're way open to emotional, immaturity. But there really are kind of 3 or 4 things that I think really do help. And these are kind of characteristics of emotionally mature leaders. And these are things that I have synthesized from the book Rare Leadership, some things from Rick Marks and some stuff from Daniel Goleman. So I don't know whose is whose, but what I'm saying is this is not original with me. But you have to realize that you have your brain has two hemispheres, right? You have a right side and a left side. And the right side of your brain is your relational side, and it works faster than the left side of your brain. And so part of what happens is, have you ever seen a person in the store or at church or somewhere, and you didn't think about it, but you had a visceral reaction when you saw them and you thought, oh no, not here, not now? Have you had that experience?
Yes.
Okay. So what that means, so what that means is, before you could even think, there's a part of your brain that had already made a decision about that person. That's the relational side of your brain. It didn't think, it intuited previous experience with that person. And so part of what we have to do at that point is we have to, what the scientists, the brain science say, is remain relational, meaning we have to keep the relationship bigger than the problem. In other words, we have to realize, I gotta love this guy. I'm going to be in heaven with this guy. I'm married to this person. I fathered this person. So keep the relationships bigger than the problem. You're not trying to win. You're trying to solve a problem. Then the next thing is to act like yourself. And by that, you're redeemed, being sanctified self. See, one of the things that's interesting about this is your brain works in levels. So if you don't control your emotions, the bottom two levels of your brain actually go into the fight or flight response. We call that the enemy brain. And your brain literally cannot get to the good stuff in order to act well. So you've got to have a way to, maybe you need to step out of the room for a minute. Maybe you need to take just a quick break. Maybe you need to stop and pray, whatever you have to do to not let the triggering mechanism in you be in control. And then what we say is return to joy. You collect yourself, and then you enter the conversation again. And when it says return to joy, it's not talking about returning to happiness in the sense of just general happiness. What the research is showing is that true joy is in connection with other people. So this is a relational happiness. Think of Hebrews chapter 12, who for the joy set before him endured the cross. So for the relational pleasure of being connected with the Father and saved people, Jesus suffered well, right? It's the same thing for us. So whenever we are triggered, so Jesus, when he was triggered, what did he say? Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. I mean, that's not a brain science scripture passage, but behaviorally, he's doing exactly what these researchers are saying that you do when your brain doesn't feel like it. So emotionally mature leaders they remain relational. Don't let the problem get bigger than that. And that's why you don't procrastinate. That's why you got to know how to handle conflicts. You always act like Jesus would act in the relationship. And then you return back to the relational joy. Like we were laughing at the start of this podcast. And part of the power of that, what that means really is that the three of us, we have what's called relational joy. We actually enjoy each other. We like each other, and we like being together. We happen to be buddies, but you don't have to be best buds. But that's really the essence of what emotional intelligence is. It's being glad you're with the people that you're with. So imagine you're on a staff team where you don't have that feeling. The opportunity for you, or you don't have that discipline, the opportunity for you to have some emotionally immature days are very high.
Wow.
So go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I can sit here and listen to this like top notch, because it's really impactful in a way of just thinking back. I don't know, Josh, I don't know about you, but I'm just like rewinding and having images in my head of how
this whole time.
And I'm
I
like, okay, I can see where I dropped the ball. I can see where I was triggered there, and or that thought went through my head and it made me think a different way or react a different way. It's kind of interesting. It's kind of like when I watched the movie And I go, this is sad. Maybe I'm going down a wrong. I watched the movie Inside Out by Disney for the first time, and I thought to myself, in that movie, I was like, they hit the nail on the head with how those emotions work. And Bob, in the same way, I think you're in my brain right now, and you're telling me exactly how my brain is operating and working. And I'm like, this is fascinating because it's enlightening to go, that's exactly right. And then the biblical side of this, of like, we were created for relationships, this community, the relationship piece matters so much. And that was one of the first things you mentioned here, like, keep it relational. Don't make the problem bigger than it. I'm thinking about how, like, this is what we were designed to do, and this is how we're designed to act. And the reason it doesn't happen that way is, again, we point it back to, the flesh taking over and the desires of the flesh taking over. And so,
well, think about this. So we tend to think that knowing Bible verses is what discipleship is. I would contend that a mature disciple is somebody who suffers well.
Boom.
And at the end of the day, we read the scripture so that our heart will surrender to the scripture and the Holy Spirit, so that whatever comes to us, we can bear up under it. Well, that's what James 1 says, enduring hardship. As a matter of fact, that James chapter 1, verses 2 and 3, it says, consider it all joy so that you can be mature. You know what the implication of that is? If you don't enter into the relational joy with the Savior, you will not be mature. It'll be just awful with no outcome of maturity. So our brains crave to run on joy. They crave to run on covenant love. So think about this. If we were to, instead of thinking of agape love, think of covenant connection. So the fruit of the Spirit is love, but instead of thinking love, I think we too often go with emotion. Think of covenant connection. I don't need more relationships. I need more covenant connection with Jay. If I'm in covenant connection with Jay, then our relationship is okay, so that Jay can say to me what he needs to say when our relationship is not working. If you have a good marriage, that's what you have. You have covenant connection that says it's okay for us not to be okay, because we can dialogue about how we're not okay. That actually produces the relational happiness that this is actually, it's talking about. If I feel relational, if I feel joy with you, that means I'm safe to be with you. Think about times you've been on a staff, and don't mention any names, but think about times you've been on a staff and you've had to sit on your emotion and push it down because it wasn't safe to say it. And think about how unhealthy that becomes. I mean, it can harden your heart. It can create bitterness. It can cause you to not trust the goodness of God, but it's not on God. It's on the fact that we're not developing the skills to enter into those conversations. Now, a whole nother podcast could be, how does this relate to culture? Because ultimately, when it comes to self-development, I'm responsible for working with, for learning emotional intelligence for me to grow. But if Josh, you're leading a church, your responsibility is to create a culture where everybody has everybody's back. So it's okay. It's okay to be in conflict, because it's not about whether you're not going to be on the team anymore. It's about how do we work together so that we re-enter the covenant joy that's possible because of emotional intelligence.
And this is really hitting me
as well.
Yeah, that's a good one. And we need to come back to that. I think for me, I'm learning this. God's a God of grace, and I think for me, I tend to, when I'm unhealthy, I tend to look at whether it's someone I'm working with or in my family, and there's conflict. I tend to, when I'm unhealthy, basically they're now a problem. They're not. I don't see them as a person first, because I want to fix the problem without knowing. I still love them, of course, but then I turn them into a problem, and then it starts to grow, right? It starts to balloon, and that's where I become and really I take something that is very small and can blow it up really big, and then I look back, go, that really was just a very small misunderstanding, whether it was a meeting or a conversation or just I said something and we both missed each other. And so I'm trying to grow in maturity where I don't ramp it up, because I will go through it in my head. I'll play it back like a tape and I'll watch it over and over again. And I've done this as you have been talking today, Bob, as well as you, Jay. I've thought about multiple instances in my past where I failed and I had to come back around and ask for forgiveness. And, especially the times I knew I did this. There's probably times I did this and didn't even know I did it.
Yeah.
And,
see, Josh,
so, yeah.
And Josh, one of the things that you said, think about this, when you see people as a problem to solve instead of a person to have covenant connection with, then think about how, I've done it. So I'm confessing, I'm not projecting onto you. Think about how selfish that is. When I turn it into a problem, it's not about them, it's about me. Because in essence, I'm trying to get them fixed so I can get them out of my way. It's not about the restoration of the relationship. Think about this. You guys have probably done the love languages, the 5 love languages, just information. And the whole point of that, or part of the point, is that we tend to love others the way we like to be loved, right? What this brain science thing works this way. The way that I'm triggered is what I tend to think other people need for their motivation. So if fear is my trigger, then what I tend to think is that I need to be the head coach or the drill sergeant boss and put fear in the team so that they can get it done, because that's what I need. But that's just the wrong thing. That's why we have to lead people based on joy, because what people really need, what their brains are craving, is to be in a place where they feel safe with the people that they're with, and the people that they're with feel safe with them. And so if we're not careful, so for instance, I'm a high I, which means I tend to procrastinate, because because I want to do the very best I can. And a high I tends to procrastinate because that energy charge you get as you get really close to the deadline actually helps me do really good work. The problem is, if I need that charge of energy because of the fear that I may not finish, I tend to project that onto everybody else. And that really does cause a problem.
Wow, that's good. I am in my mind, I'm trying to just slow my mind down from going those places of where have I'm now self-examining every leadership conversations I've ever had. Thanks a lot, Bob.
Well, that's a sign of emotional maturity.
Now thanks a lot, Bob. Now I'm questioning every conversation I've ever had with anyone. And I'm actually thinking about some of the conversations we've had and going, man, did I mess up with some of the conversations I had with Bob? Even that kind of concept, just because of just the way you're in my brain. Like I said, the best way to describe it is when I watch the movie Inside Out, and man, you hit the nail on the head of how those emotions work and those core memories that now you're in my brain, and you're trying to, you're really dissecting that. And so I think anyone who's listening and going, man, this is something that we should pay attention to. It's extremely important, and really can make and break your leadership ability, the ability for you to have influence and lead. In any capacity. It can make or break it. It could be a deal breaker really quickly.
Let me give you one little thing that I think might help build some empathy for your listeners. If you think about an elevator, and your brain is an elevator, the first floor, when you encounter something, the question you're asking is this personal to me? So when you get a thought in your head, in the relational side of your brain, the right-hand side, your brain immediately decides whether is it going to affect me or not. If it does, if the brain does think it, then it goes to the second floor, which is assessment. And it asks this question: is this good, bad, or scary? And so at that point, it's going to determine whether it's okay for me to experience this or whether I need to run to protect myself. Think about this. If Bob's afraid of dogs, and I had I see a big dog. I'm a little kid. I see a big dog. And now I'm having to decide what I'm going to do. If there's a loving parent beside me, or a big brother who actually just takes my hand and says, hey, Bob, this is going to be okay. That dog looks mean, but look at its tail. It's really wagging okay. Let's go pet him. Or maybe it is a mean dog, but he walks me around and he stands between me and the dog. It goes to the third level of the brain, which is called attunement, which actually it shows me that somebody's with me, that somebody understands me, and our brain archives that. So in other words, I've had a bad situation with a dog, but I had somebody who loved me, So now I have an archive I can go back to so that when I see another bad dog, I know actually what to do. Think about this. Think about the people who haven't had some of the parenting that we've had, and they didn't have a loving parent there to help them with the bad dog. Or maybe there's actually been abuse or some kind of traumatic experience in their life at that good, bad, or scary level. There's no archive. So you're expecting somebody who has no archive of good biblical covenant responsibility and love. You're expecting them to behave in a way that they have no way to understand because there's no archive in their brain about it. Mm-hmm. I mean, is that not incredibly insightful? Not that I'm smart, but isn't that helpful to understand why we need to be empathetic with people that are far from God?
That's huge.
I think it's very, very, and again, I wrote that down because I think that's extremely important. And it reminds me of this week. I was going back and Bob, I've told people I went through a training with you, the unique 1-day retreat. And one of the things we did during that was, if you remember, you took me on this journey through my childhood, really, honestly. Right. And you were like, yeah, these are some people who, these were big wins that took place in your life. And then you connected this dot that was just, I mean, in the room, you could tell it was like this light bulb went off where you're like, and what's happening is you're trying to recreate this same thing for your daughter now that was created for you. Do you remember that moment?
Yeah, I do. I'm having goosebumps right now. Yep.
Yeah, it was a mind, and I reread that this week, and it prompted me going, man, this was one of the best things I had ever done. It really is. It's one of the best things I'd done, and I think it was the first one you ever did. And so thank you for letting me be your guinea pig on that. But I can attest that it was really, really, truly a very impactful time for me as a leader. But it was exactly what you're talking about right now. It was like these core memories, these core things happened in my life, and I was trying to replicate that. Because I was like, I know what that's like. I know what that's to go through. I know what that's, that is. And that's exactly what you're talking about here. And yeah, I think this is fascinating, fascinating things that we're discussing here. So Josh, you got any follow-up questions or anything? I want to make sure I'm talking a lot, I feel like, on this one.
No, I love you being open and transparent here on the Pastor Pod, Jay. So thank you.
That's what we're all about.
But I love this conversation because the emotional maturity topic, or maybe genre, has become so big the last 10 years or so. I think maybe longer. I don't know. Because I think there's been so much fallout, and leaders have been stressed out. I mean, I've been through my seasons of ups and downs and trying to be healthy and mature in how I respond and how I deal with conflict and deal with change. So I think this is definitely one of the most important conversations that we need to have as people, not just leaders, not just pastors, but people. And I do agree. There's probably 2 to 3, maybe 4 podcast episodes coming out of this one that we need to tackle.
Yeah.
But I think the first step for me is learning to be aware of my unhealthy patterns. And like you said, Bob, those questions I'm asking myself: is this personal? Is this good, bad, or scary? Or is this a trigger from my childhood? Is this a trigger of insecurity, right? That came from this moment. I was thinking about a moment when I was about 9 years old. I'm a big basketball guy, if you don't know this about me, but I'd played on
new coach. He planned tryouts and basically told us that, hey, listen, if you hear from me, you made the team, right? Or no, if you don't hear from me, you made the team, is what I heard. That's not what he said. Of course, I was like 9, 10 years old, right? Hearing the coach, and I'd already made the team. And, I've always been really intense and competitive person. Just the way I'm wired. And so I went back to the first practice the next week. And I still remember this moment. Like it literally stuck with me. I walk back in the gym. I see all my buddies. I think I was like close to 10 years old. And the year before, we'd almost won the championship. I played a lot. We all played a lot. Anyway, I walk in and all the kids are like high-fiving me, saying what's up. And the coach, this new coach, who I guess obviously didn't want me on the team, walks up to me in front of the entire team. He said, "Robinson." I said, "Yes, sir." He goes, "What are you doing here?" and the whole team, like, like in a movie, everybody went, all the heads just stopped. Everybody stopped talking. He goes, you didn't make the team. What are you doing here?
Wow.
And I remember that moment, man. My mom was standing there. Of course, my mom didn't know anything about,
Right.
how I misheard it or whatever. And I got back in that old box van we had, the Mitsubishi. I remember that Mitsubishi box van that was non-aerodynamic. And we're driving back. I lived in southern Louisiana at the time in this little town, and my dad was a pastor there. And I remember just like the whole drive home, just crying, like a baby.
Yeah.
And I will tell you that fueled the rest of my childhood. Like, I will say I walked on in college. I mean, regardless of how well I did in basketball, I never played the same. And you could write a story. Oh, you learned how to play competitive, and you were more passionate, and you were like, Michael Jordan, his brother beat him all the time. And I get all that. But what it did is it was kind of one of those moments where I do think that performance became what I focused on. And so God has been really unraveling. That's like a small story, really, when you think about my life. But at the same time, that was a moment where I was completely like, I failed. And I didn't want to feel that way anymore. So I do think in a very real way, I've carried some of that with me through my ministry and through my life, that I don't want to fail. Yeah. I don't want to be viewed as a loser. I want to win. I want everything up and to the right. And so I'm going to put it all in the field, all in the court. I'm going to pour it out. I'm going to work long hours. I'm going to work harder than anybody else. And yes, work ethic is good. Honoring God with our lives is good. But at the end of the day, I think one of the reasons I've been immature in my emotional health is because I've based my identity and my worth on my performance and not my position as a child of God. So I think that's something that this has brought out today. So being real transparent with you.
So Genesis 50:20, right? Joseph comes to the end of his life, and now he has 20/20 vision about everything that happens. And he says, what you meant for evil, God meant for good, for the saving of many. I think we all have a Genesis 50:20 moment. And the great news about this, about any time that you're more self-aware, God can redeem it. I mean, what an awful story. What a terrible thing for a coach to do to a whatever age kid whatever that is. It'd be traumatic for anyone. The good news is, even if you took it as a negative emotion for a while, we never know when God's going to redeem a thing. And so I'm 59 and God's doing his deepest discipling work in my life now. I mean, it's not like you arrive. And I think one of the things that's super important is to remember that we're human beings. I think I want to be careful when I say this, but I think pastors over spiritualize. And I think there are some, I think you're a human being, and I think emotions have to be dealt with. They have to be felt. And I think you have to process them. And I think, if not, then you're not being a human being. And so don't be ashamed of them, process them, ask what they mean. And so anyway, I just, that's a great story. I mean, it's an awful story, but it actually makes the point that you're talking about today.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for sharing, Josh. Good stuff. Bob, I think I'd be reluctant to say, this is going to spark, this could potentially, depending on who listens, could spark some very, very high interest in learning more about their emotions and how their emotions play out in leadership and things of that sort. So I'm going to go to you and go, do you have any off the top of your head where you can point people resource wise and say, these are some things you could check out, whether it be, blogs, books, whatever it may be? Where would you point somebody to say, hey, I want to learn more about this and tackle this a little bit more? Where would you point them to?
So if you're kind of an academic person and you can, and you want the real science of it, I mean, I would point to Daniel Goleman's work. Just look up Daniel Goleman. You'll see there's like textbooks, but also some popular versions. If you want the the real distilled, that's not the right way to say. If you want a purely Christian perspective on it, the book Rare Leadership and the Other Half of Church deal with these. There, what's funny is I posted that I read that about 6 months ago, and it's been the most. I mean, more people have read that based on that, but then they call me or text me or direct message me and say, "What about all this brain science?" Well, here's the funny thing about that to me. I started off as a biology major. When you read the brain science of this, I don't have enough faith to be an evolutionist. When you look at the I could cry right now, the design in your brain, and how that Romans 12:1 and 2 about renewing our mind and our heart, it's not about the chest, it's about how we think, it's about where our worldview is stored. That God's biology, God designed you to be discipled. He designed you to be somebody who could archive things and to walk with other people so you can pour into their archive. I'm sorry. So rare leadership and the other half of church would be two that are within everybody's reach. And if you're not a reader, I would suggest the audiobooks. The audiobooks are good. There's a website called Deeper Life. I can't remember if it's .org or .com, but it's Deeper Life, and you'll see there's some of those resources there. You can actually get videos from the people who wrote the book. That's not super expensive. They're in the $29 to $49 range. And then, so those would be the resources that I'd recommend.
And I think that's a great place to start. We'll do our best to get those documented somewhere, and you can grab those in the show notes on the podcast here, or you can feel free to email us, thepastorpod@gmail.com. We'll get you those notes. And if we mess them up or something along those lines, we'll get you in contact with Bob. And Bob, yeah, this has been good stuff. Any final thoughts, Josh, as we kind of maybe land a little bit here on this conversation?
No, I appreciate the genuineness of you, Bob, and just your investment in my life. I know Jay as well. And of course, if you know Bob, you know that already. And I think one thing that you've modeled well that I'm trying to learn is always fight for the relationship, and always be willing to have those conversations to win that relationship and find unity. You know, one thing I'm trying to encourage our team here is we don't talk about each other. We talk to each other and with each other.
Yeah.
And so I don't think that was original with me, but it's wherever I heard it, it stuck with me.
Super helpful.
Because we're going to fight for unity, and with our elders, our leadership, we talk a lot about that we don't want to let the enemy place a bitter root in our church and our leadership, in our families, our marriages, and I think at the very end of the day, I think emotionally healthy people are humble people, and so I think that's really what Jesus modeled so well.
I think we might have gone too long, but I do want to say that you guys can edit this out. So if somebody wants to become a generous person, you don't wait to get rich and then be generous, right? Generosity comes by giving from what you currently have. When it comes to this, one of the counterintuitive things about this is unity on a team comes when you handle conflict well. It's not always prevented. The deepest learning about safety on your team is when there's something unsafe happening and you create safety. So it's not a failure for there to be conflict on your team. What you need to do in that moment is to look at everybody as people and not problems, and create a safe space. Then it archives for them so that they can go back and draw on the fact, hey, I can really trust these guys. So think about if you've done that 10 times.
Yeah.
I'm convinced that some of the moral failures we have is not because the people were so evil. It's because the space was so unsafe. There was no archive to go back to, that they felt alone. Mark Driscoll didn't wake up planning to have whatever the problems were that he had. But there was something that made it so he couldn't go back to the archive and create a safe space for his team.
Okay, I'm not going to tackle that because that's a whole, you can get me all weird. I could go on for days about that, but the reality is you're absolutely right. And I think as you're looking at that level, the elevator, the level 1, 2, 3, the goal is to get into level 3 where they can acknowledge and see that modeled for them. And I think what you're acknowledging here is that we haven't done a good job. And I say we collectively maybe haven't done a good job specifically. And you're talking on your church staffs of creating that safe place, that environment where it's it's okay to not be okay, but it's not okay to stay there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so it's okay to not to be okay, but it's not okay to stay there. So we want to work with you through that process and not really, target our own, come alongside of and create a space where, there's a place for everybody to grow. We're all learning. And I think that starts with leaders acknowledging that they're not okay. And they also need to learn at times. So,
and the executive pastor in me wants to say this as my final words. This doesn't mean nobody will ever be fired on your staff. I mean, there's still incompetence. I mean, but it's not the first result. I mean, it's when you've created the safe space. If somebody still can't do the job, if they still can't, then okay, you've treated them well. And as somebody who's had to let several people go, I can tell you this: I've had people call me and thank me later for helping them transition, even though it was awful for me and awful for them, but God was in it. And that's what's so weird. It's hard to see God in it. But I know people having amazing futures now that they were not having amazing futures or amazing presence, but they had to go through that. So anyway.
Well, thank you for saying that, because I think every leader, and especially executive pastors right now, are going, whew, okay, I can still fire people if I needed to, right? You're giving me the freedom. Like at first they're like, wait a minute, this means I can't fire anybody. What in the world am I gonna do? So thank you for saying that. That freedom to go, hey, sometimes that still is the case, but the way you go about doing it is super important. So great conversation today. Thanks so much again, Bob, for being here for episode 50. You have really marked us from day one. You were, I believe, our first guest on the podcast. And here you are at episode 50 of many, many, many more to come. Honored. And so thanks for having that. Thanks for dropping some great knowledge on us today. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. The email is thepastorpod@gmail.com. We're on Instagram, Facebook, all of those social media places. You can reach out to us there as well. Thank you for listening in to this important conversation. Have a great weekend. Hope to see you back next week.